Have you ever looked into the eyes of someone you thought was your enemy, only to discover they might be the only person who can save you? The Sonoran Desert stretched endless under a merciless June sky. Heat rose in visible
You can't
waves from the
escape.
cracked earth,
I
distorting
won't
the
let you.
horizon into a
Then you'll
shimmering
fall.
mirage
Not
of false
today!
water and broken promises. It was June 16th, 1881, and by 10 o'clock in the morning, the temperature had already climbed past 108 degrees. Daniel Morgan rode his buckskin mare Whiskey along the dried creek bed that marked the eastern boundary of his land. At 42 years old, he'd learned to read the desert's moods the way some men read newspapers. Today, the desert was angry, vindictive, the kind of heat that made rattlesnakes seek shade and scorpions burrow deep. Daniel was a tall man, 6 feet even, with shoulders broadened by 2 decades of ranch work and a face weathered to leather by the Arizona sun. His hair, once dark as coal, now showed silver at the temples. Gray-green eyes that had seen too much sat deep in a
can't
face
escape.
lined by sun and
I
sorrow.
won't let you.
A jagged
Then
scar
you'll
ran
fall.
from his
Not
left
today!
eyebrow to his cheekbone, a memento from Shiloh where he'd fought for the Union and learned that war made victims of everyone. Whiskey's ears flicked nervously. The mare sensed something before Daniel did, some disturbance in the desert's rhythm that made her steps cautious. Then Daniel saw them. Vultures. 6 of them circled maybe half a mile ahead, their dark wings catching thermals in lazy spirals. Vultures meant death or dying. In this heat, the distinction hardly mattered. He urged Whiskey forward, following the birds. The Winchester rifle across his saddle felt heavier than usual, loaded with 8 rounds that he hoped he wouldn't need. His Colt Peacemaker rode on his right hip, a familiar weight that had saved his life more times than he cared to remember.
You can't
The
escape.
stakes appeared
I won't
like some
let
twisted
you.
crucifixion.
Then you'll fall.
Not
4
today!
wooden posts driven deep into the hardpan, forming a square perhaps 8 feet across. And suspended between them by an arm spread wide and bound with rawhide rope hung a woman. Daniel dismounted quickly, his boots hitting sand with a soft thud. He approached carefully, eyes scanning the surrounding rocks and brush for ambush. In the Arizona territory of 1881, mercy could get you killed faster than malice. The woman's head hung forward, long black hair obscuring her face. She wore traditional Apache clothing, a buckskin dress decorated with intricate beadwork that, even covered in dust, spoke of skilled craftsmanship. Turquoise and silver jewelry adorned her neck and wrists, the kind of pieces worth a month's wages to any
You
thief.
can't escape.
But it was the
I won't
medallion
let
around her
you.
neck that made
Then you'll
Daniel's chest
fall.
tighten.
Not today!
He recognized the design, had seen it once before on a treaty document. The symbol of the Chiricahua leadership. This wasn't just any Apache woman. This was someone important. Her lips were cracked and bleeding from exposure. Her skin, naturally dark, had been burned darker still by the relentless sun. Daniel estimated she'd been here at least 24 hours, maybe longer, in this heat that should have killed her. But her chest still rose and fell with shallow breaths. He pulled his canteen, uncapped it, and stepped closer. "Miss, can you hear me?" Her head lifted slowly, dark eyes focused on him with surprising clarity given her condition. Those eyes held no gratitude, no relief, only cold assessment, measuring him the way a soldier measures an enemy position. When she spoke, her voice was a rasp, like wind through dead grass. "Water." Daniel raised the canteen toward her lips. That's when the knife appeared. Her right hand, which he'd thought was bound, suddenly held a blade, small, barely 4 inches of steel, but deadly in skilled hands. It sliced through the air where his throat had been a heartbeat before. Daniel jerked back, water spilling across the sand. His hand went instinctively to his Colt, drawing and cocking in one smooth motion. "Easy." His voice carried the authority of a man who'd given orders under fire. "I'm trying to help." "Help?" She laughed, the sound bitter and broken. "White men don't help. They take, they lie, they kill." Her English was perfect, each word carefully pronounced, despite the cracked lips. Educated. Daniel had heard enough reservation Apache to know the difference between someone who'd picked up English from traders and someone who'd been formally taught. "Who are you?" he asked, keeping the Colt steady but pointed at the ground. "I am Kimamela, daughter of Chief Cocheda." She said the name like a challenge. "And you are trespassing on land that was stolen from my people." Daniel felt pieces falling into place. Cocheda. He'd heard that name spoken in whispers in Tucson saloons and around Army campfires. The Apache leader who'd kept 3 companies of cavalry chasing shadows for the better part of 6 years. The strategist who'd orchestrated raids so precise they'd become legendary. The man who refused every treaty because he'd learned that white promises dissolve like morning dew. Then what are you doing tied up out here like bait? Her eyes narrowed. Because I volunteered to be captured, to learn their plans, their numbers, where they keep their weapons. She gestured at her bonds with contempt. Being left to DA was not part of the arrangement. Who left you? Captain Silas Webb, your cavalry officer who trades guns to my people, then uses those same guns as justification to slaughter villages. Her voice grew harder. He discovered I was gathering evidence, so he left me here to die, while he prepares his final solution. The sound of horses interrupted whatever Daniel might have said. Dust clouds rose from the north, moving fast. Multiple riders, and they weren't coming for a social call. Daniel's knife made quick work of the rawhide binding Kimimela's wrists. She collapsed as her weight hit her legs, muscles cramped from hours of immobility. But she was up again within seconds, testing her limbs like a warrior checking weapons before battle. How many? She asked, her eyes already scanning the horizon. Daniel's cavalry training took over. 6, maybe 7. Can you ride? Her answer was to vault onto Whiskey's back behind him, movements fluid despite the ordeal. No complaints about pain or exhaustion, just pure survival instinct. Daniel spurred Whiskey hard. The mare responded, powerful legs churning across the broken ground. Behind them came shouts and the crack of rifle fire. Bullets whined past, kicking up spurts of sand. That's Daniel Morgan, a voice shouted from the pursuers. The war hero from Broken Arrow Ranch. Daniel recognized that voice. Lieutenant Marcus Hayes, Captain Webb's right hand, a man who'd earned his commission through political connections rather than competence. You know him, Kimimela shouted over the wind and pounding hooves. We have history, Daniel called back. Bad history. A rifle shot spanged off a rock near Whiskey's hooves. The mare stumbled, but recovered, foam flying from her muzzle. She was cavalry trained, had carried Daniel through battles at Shiloh and Stones River. But she was carrying double weight across killing terrain, and the pursuers were gaining. Ahead, the land broke into a maze of arroyos and redstone formations. Devil's Backbone, the locals called it, narrow passages that could hide a man or kill him, depending on which turns he took. Daniel guided Whiskey into the maze. The walls rose up on either side, blocking the sun, dropping the temperature 20 degrees. Sound echoed strangely here, making it impossible to judge distance or direction. They rode hard for maybe a quarter mile before Daniel pulled up in a wider section where ancient rockfall had created natural cover. He dismounted Winchester already in hand and took position where he could watch their back trail. Kimimela was beside him without being asked, holding a Colt Navy revolver she'd somehow acquired. Daniel hadn't seen her take it from his saddlebag, but there it was in her hand, handled with the confidence of someone who knew her way around firearms. Morgan, Hayes's voice echoed off the stone walls. Send out the Apache and you can ride away. Like hell, Daniel shouted back. Think about it. Morgan, this doesn't concern you. This is military business. Military business, Daniel's voice carried bitter sarcasm. That what you call leaving a woman tied up to die in the desert? Silence stretched taut as a drawn bowstring. When Hayes spoke again, his tone had changed, colder, more calculating. You don't understand what's at stake here. There's copper on Apache land, millions of dollars worth. This territory needs that copper, needs the prosperity it'll bring. And the Apache, Kimimela's clear voice rang out. What about what we need? You'll be relocated, compensated fairly, given good reservation land where you can farm and prosper. You mean imprisoned on wasteland while you strip our mountains, she shot back. We've seen your reservations. We've heard your promises. We know what they're worth. Hayes laughed, but there was no humor in it. The world's changing, girl. Your people can adapt or disappear. That's not cruelty. That's just progress. Daniel felt Kimimela tense beside him, felt the rage barely contained beneath her controlled exterior. How long have you known about the copper? Daniel called off. Long enough to make arrangements, long enough to ensure the Apache problem gets solved permanently. The words hung in the air like smoke from a funeral pyre. Daniel understood then what Kimimela had been investigating. Not just gun running, not just treaty violations, but a coordinated plan to provoke conflict, create justification for removal, and open the land for mining. 2 years ago, Daniel said slowly, pieces clicking together, The raid on Mesquite Valley, 20 settlers dead. You said it was Apache. It was Apache, Hayes confirmed. Apache I armed and pointed in the right direction. Apache who didn't know they were being used to justify what comes next. Kimimela's breath hissed out. You murdered your own people to create an excuse. I created an opportunity, and tomorrow at dawn when we attack the Chiricahua village at Copper Springs, we'll create the final solution. Every man, woman, and child. A tragic necessity, of course. They fired on soldiers. We had to defend ourselves. No survivors to contradict the official report. Daniel's blood ran cold. Copper Springs was where Cocheta's band had their main settlement. Over 200 people, families, children, elders who'd seen their world shrinking year by year and held on to what scraps remained. A massacre, planned, calculated, justified in advance. Why tell us this? Kimimela asked. If you plan to kill us anyway, because it doesn't matter. Hayes sounded almost sad. You can't stop it, can't warn anyone in time, can't prove anything. By this time tomorrow, the copper will be accessible, the Apache will be gone, and I'll be a hero who dealt decisively with a terrorist threat. The shooting started again. Professional fire, methodical. Hayes's men knew their business. Daniel returned fire carefully. 8 rounds in the Winchester. Had to make each one count. Beside him, Kimimela's Navy Colt barked twice. Somewhere in the rocks, a man screamed. How many rounds do you have? Daniel asked during a lull. 3 left. I've got 8 in the rifle, 6 in the Peacemaker. Not enough if they rush. They won't rush. Hayes is too cautious. Daniel had served with the lieutenant in the war, knew his patterns. He'll try to flank us instead. As if on cue, gunfire erupted from their left. Hayes had split his force, sent men up a parallel arroyo to come at them from the side. We need to move, Kimimela said. Where we're boxed in. Not quite. She pointed to a shadow in the rock face Daniel had taken for just another crevice. That's a passage. Leads deeper into the formations. How do you know? Because Apache children play in these rocks. I know every tunnel, every passage, every secret the desert keeps. They fell back fighting, giving ground grudgingly. Daniel's Winchester spoke 3 more times. 5 rounds left. Kimimela's Colt was empty now, but she'd picked up a fallen soldier's Spencer carbine and used it with deadly efficiency. The passage swallowed them. Narrow enough they had to turn sideways in places. Dark enough that Daniel lost sight of Kimimela ahead of him, could only follow the sound of her breathing and the faint scrape of her moccasins on stone. Light appeared ahead, not sunlight, softer. The glow of late afternoon filtering through a wider opening. They emerged into a natural chamber, maybe 40 feet across. Wooden crates filled the space stacked 3 and 4 high. Each one stenciled with clear military markings, U.S. Army, Fort Huachuca, handle with care. Kimimela moved to the nearest crate and pried the lid loose with her knife. Inside, wrapped in oiled cloth, lay Springfield rifles. New models, still factory fresh. Sweet Jesus, Daniel breathed. The next crate held ammunition. The one after that, revolvers. In the corner sat something that made Daniel's stomach drop. A Gatling gun, its brass fittings polished to a mirror shine. Webb has been stockpiling for months, Kimimela said. Her voice was flat, empty of emotion. The voice of someone who'd seen too much to be shocked anymore. Selling weapons to Apache warriors, then reporting the sales as theft to justify bringing in more arms from the army, creating a cycle of violence and profit. She pulled something from behind the rifle crates. A leather-bound ledger, the kind merchants used for accounts. Daniel opened it, tilting it toward the light. The entries were meticulously detailed. May 2nd, 1881, 15 rifles to Cocheta's band, $300, signed Sewam. Webb, May 4th, 1881, reported Apache raid on Miller Homestead, 8 dead. Request for reinforcements submitted May 7th, 1881. Troop increase approved, $8,000 for allocation from War Department. The pattern repeated page after page. Weapon sales followed by attacks followed by requests for more military funding. A perfect cycle of manufactured crisis and profit. He's been creating the war, Daniel said. Every raid, every death, every reason for the army to be here. All of it orchestrated. And tomorrow he ends it, Kimimela said. Massacres my people. claims victory, opens the copper mines. Her jaw tightened. Legal, clean, profitable. A sound from the passage entrance made them both spin. A figure stepped into the chamber, hands raised moving slowly. Miguel Santos. Daniel recognized him immediately. 40 years old, half Mexican, half Apache, with the weathered face of someone who'd spent his life caught between worlds. He wore trail clothes and carried a Henry rifle slung across his back. "Easy, amigos," Miguel said. His English carried the musical accent of someone who'd grown up speaking Spanish. "I'm not here to fight you." "You were at the stakes," Kimimela said coldly. "You helped tie me up, helped leave me to die." "I did." No denial, no excuses. "Webb hired me 3 months ago, said he needed a guide, said there was an Apache spy gathering information for raids, said we'd capture her, question her, exchange her for peace." He gestured at the weapons. "He didn't tell me about this." "So why help now?" Daniel asked, fingers still on the Winchester's trigger. "Because I have a daughter." Miguel's voice cracked slightly. 4 years old. Her mother died last winter. I took Webb's money to feed her, to keep her safe. He looked at the Gatling gun. "But what kind of world am I building for her? What kind of man am I if I let this happen?" "What's coming tomorrow?" Kimimela demanded. "Webb's moving the timetable up. Not dawn, 3 in the morning, while it's still full dark. He figures your people will be deep asleep. Easier to kill." 3 in the morning, that was 6 hours away. "How far to Copper Springs?" Daniel asked. 18 miles through the Dragoon Mountains. 4 hours hard ride, maybe 5. The math was brutal. They had 6 hours before the attack, 5 hours of riding to reach the village. That left 1 hour to evacuate 200 people through darkness across terrain that could kill the unwary. "How did you find us?" Kimimela asked. Miguel pointed deeper into the cave. "There's another way out. Tunnel that leads to a ravine near Skeleton Creek. I figured you'd head this direction. Figured you'd need help." "Or you're leading us into another trap," Kimimela said. Miguel looked her in the eye. "My daughter's name is Sophia. She has her mother's smile and her father's stubbornness. She likes to catch lizards and ask questions about why the sky changes color at sunset." His voice dropped. "I want her to grow up in a territory where we don't murder children for profit. If that makes me a traitor to Webb, so be it." Daniel made a decision. "Show us the way out." The tunnel was narrow, twisting, dangerous in the growing darkness, but it opened onto a ravine, just as Miguel had promised. 3 horses waited there. Miguel's own mount plus 2 cavalry horses he'd acquired somewhere. "You'll need fresh animals," Miguel said. "Your mare's exhausted." It was true. Whiskey stood with her head down, sides heaving. She'd given everything she had. "We split up," Miguel continued. "I ride south to where Cocheta's hunting parties are camped. Bring them back to defend the village. You two go to Copper Springs. Warn Cocheta. Start evacuation if possible." "That's a lot of ground to cover," Daniel said. "It's the only play we have." Kimimela looked at Miguel for a long moment. Finally, she nodded. "If you betray us, if you lead my father's warriors into ambush, I will find you. I will hunt you across every mile of this territory. And when I find you, your death will be slow." "Fair enough," Miguel said. "If I betray you, I'll deserve it." He mounted his horse, a tough-looking Mustang. "If I don't make it back, Sophia's with her Aunt Maria in Tombstone. 3rd Street, the house with blue shutters." He looked at Daniel. Tell her I tried to be better." "You'll tell her yourself," Daniel said. But Miguel was already gone, riding hard toward the southern hills. Daniel and Kimimela stood alone in the ravine. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of blood and fire. Somewhere ahead, 200 people slept, unaware that death was coming for them in the darkness. "Can we trust him?" Kimimela asked. "I don't know, but we don't have much choice." They mounted the fresh horses. Daniel took a strong-looking bay gelding. Kimimela chose a gray mare that moved like smoke. 18 miles, she said. 6 hours until the massacre. "Then we'd better ride fast." They spurred the horses into motion. The desert night descended around them, swift and absolute. Stars emerged one by one, cold and distant. Somewhere behind them, Webb was preparing his men for murder. Somewhere ahead, a village slept. And between those 2 points, racing through darkness, 2 unlikely allies fought against time and the weight of history and the simple, terrible fact that sometimes good people arrive too late to stop evil. The race had begun, and the desert patient and eternal waited to see whether this time mercy would move faster than malice. The horse's hooves drummed against hard pan earth in steady rhythm. Daniel and Kimamela rode through darkness, broken only by starlight, pushing their mounts as hard as they dared, without breaking them. Mile 5 brought them to a steep ascent into the Dragoon Mountains. The trail narrowed to barely more than a goat path, winding between boulders and scrub pine. One misstep would send horse and rider tumbling down slopes that fell away into invisible darkness. Kimimela rode ahead, guiding them through terrain she knew by instinct as much as sight. Daniel followed, trusting her completely, despite knowing her only hours. Strange how crisis created trust where years of peace might never have managed it. How much further, he called over the wind. 10 miles, maybe less through the pass. Thunder rumbled in the distance, a summer storm building over the mountains. In the desert, such storms could turn dry washes into raging torrents within minutes. They'd have to cross the San Pedro River before that happened, or risk being stranded. At mile 8, they reached the river crossing. The water ran dark and fast, swollen from mountain runoff. Deeper than Daniel had hoped. More dangerous than he'd like. "We go straight through," Kimimela decided. "The fort is 3 miles east, and we don't have 3 miles to spare." She urged her gray mare into the water without hesitation. The horse balked, sensing danger, but Kimimela's firm hand and steady voice convinced her forward. Daniel followed. The bay geldings stepped carefully, feeling for secure footing on the rocky bottom. The current pulled hard, cold water rising to the horses' chests, their bellies, their shoulders. Then they were swimming, or rather the horses were swimming, while Daniel and Kimimela clung to saddles and tried not to become dead weight. The current dragged them downstream. Daniel felt the bay's powerful muscles working beneath him. The animal's neck stretched forward, nostrils flaring to keep above water. 20 yards became 30, 40. Then the bay's hooves found purchase. The horse lunged forward, climbing the far bank in a scramble of muscle and determination. They emerged dripping, gasping, but alive. Kimimela was already there, wringing water from her hair. Well ridden. They didn't stop to rest. Couldn't afford to. The storm was getting closer, lightning forking across the sky in brilliant white streaks. Mile 12 brought them to a small spring surrounded by cottonwood trees. Not much, barely more than a seep in the rocks, but the horses needed water and a moment to catch their breath. While the animals drank, Daniel pulled jerky from his saddlebag. Salt-cured beef, tough as old boots, but edible. He split it evenly with Kimimela. She ate mechanically, chewing without tasting, her mind clearly elsewhere. "Your father," Daniel said, "what's he like?" "Stubborn." A faint smile crossed her face. "Wise, fierce. He's 60 years old but can still outride men half his age. He's seen our world shrinking year by year. Watched white settlers take land treaty by treaty, promise by broken promise." The smile faded. "He wanted me to be a bridge, to learn white ways so I could negotiate, protect our people using their laws against them." "Where did you learn English?" "Mission school in Santa Fe, 8 years. Her voice carried old bitterness. "They tried to beat the Apache out of me. Beat the language, the customs, the beliefs. Make me civilized." She spat the word like poison. "But I learned their laws, their treaties, their precious constitution. And I learned that their laws only protect people they consider fully human, that justice bends toward power, that treaties mean nothing when copper is discovered on worthless reservation land." Daniel had no answer to that. He'd seen too much in the war, seen too much since to argue with your assessment. "I lost someone too," he said finally. "My son, Matthew. He was 10 years old." Kimimela looked at him, waiting. 3 years ago, cholera epidemic swept through Tucson. Took him in 5 days. I sat beside his bed and watched him die and couldn't do a damn thing to help. Daniel's voice went rough. "My wife Ann, she blamed me. Said if I'd taken the family back east like she wanted, Matthew would still be alive. She left me 6 months later. Haven't seen her since." "Is that why you helped me, to save a child you couldn't save?" "Maybe. Or maybe I'm just tired of good people dying while bastards like Webb profit." He met her eyes. "Does the reason matter?" "No," she said softly. "I suppose it doesn't." They rode on. The storm held off, but lightning continued to paint the sky in brilliant flashes. Each burst of light revealed the landscape in frozen detail. Twisted Joshua trees, scattered boulders, the endless sweep of desert and mountain. At mile 15 they heard it. Gunfire. Faint but unmistakable. Coming from the direction of Copper Springs. No, Kimimela breathed. They're early. Webb moved up the timetable again. She spurred her horse into a full gallop, caution abandoned. Daniel followed his bay gelding, stretching out beside her gray mare. The sound of rifles grew louder with each passing moment. They crested the final ridge and saw the village below. Copper Springs sat in a natural bowl, protected on three sides by steep slopes. Maybe 40 lodges arranged in loose circles around a central fire pit. And surrounding the village in a tightening noose were soldiers, not the full force, maybe 20 men, but enough to kill everyone if no one stopped them. But something was wrong. The expected massacre wasn't happening. Instead, the soldiers had dismounted and formed a defensive perimeter. They were shooting, but not at the village. They were shooting at each other. Through his spyglass, Daniel saw the scene unfold. A young lieutenant, couldn't be more than 25, stood with his rifle lowered facing down three hard-faced men who looked like hired guns rather than soldiers. Behind the lieutenant were 6 soldiers, young men with terrified faces torn between duty and conscience. And caught in the middle, pressed against the village's edge, were the people Webb had come to murder. Women holding children, elders who'd lived through a lifetime of broken promises, all of them watching to see if they would live or die. "It's a mutiny," Kimimela said with wonder. Some of them refused to fire. Daniel and Kimimela rode down hard, making no attempt at stealth. The commotion of their arrival drew every eye. The lieutenant turned hand going to his pistol, then stopping when he saw they were alone. "Who are you?" he demanded. "Daniel Morgan. Used to ride with the 4th Cavalry. This is Kimimela, daughter of Chief Cochetta." One of the hired guns spat. "The hell you doing with an Apache, Morgan? You turned traitor." "I'm stopping a war crime," Daniel said flatly. "What's your excuse for being here?" The lieutenant stepped forward. "I'm Lieutenant Peter Donovan. Captain Webb ordered us to attack this village at 0300 hours. Said they were harboring stolen weapons and planning raids." His young face was pale strained. "But when we got here, all I saw were families, children, no weapons, no warriors, just people." "And so you refused the order," Daniel said. "3 of my men did. These others?" He gestured at the hired guns. "They're on Webb's private payroll. They want to finish the job regardless." The lead mercenary, a thick-necked man at the knife scar bisecting his face, raised his rifle. "Lieutenant's got no spine, but we do. Webb pays us to solve problems, and that's what we're going to do." Daniel's Colt was out and cocked before the mercenary finished speaking. "The first man who aims at those people dies. Your choice how this goes." Kimimela had her captured Spencer carbine trained on a second mercenary. Her voice was ice. "I've already died once this week. I'm not afraid to die again. But I'll take 3 of you with me. Who wants to volunteer?" Tension stretched like a wire pulled to breaking point. 7 soldiers with Donovan, 3 mercenaries against them, and Daniel and Kimimela in the middle. Math that would end bloody regardless of who won. Then hoofbeats echoed from the pass. Multiple horses moving fast. Miguel Santos appeared at the head of 40 Apache warriors. They rode in tight formation weapons, ready faces painted for war. At their center rode Chief Cochetta himself. The old chief was exactly as Daniel had imagined from stories. Tall despite his years, with a face carved by weather and wisdom into something resembling ancient stone. He wore simple buckskin and carried a Winchester that looked well used and well maintained. Cochetta's eyes found Kimimela. Something passed between father and daughter. Relief, love, unspoken communication that needed no words. Then the chief's gaze swept across the scene. The soldiers, the mercenaries, the village behind them. When he spoke, his English was clear and measured. "My daughter, you live." "I live, father, thanks to this man." She gestured at Daniel. Cochetta studied Daniel with eyes that missed nothing. "You are the white rancher who pulled her from Webb's trap." "Yes." "And you brought her here to warn us." "Yes." The chief nodded slowly. "Then you have my gratitude. But this—" He gestured at the surrounding soldiers, the defensive positions, the barely averted massacre. "This requires more than gratitude. This requires answers." Miguel spoke up. "Chief Cochetta, I have information. Evidence. Webb has been orchestrating this war for profit. I can prove it. Prove it then. Miguel produced the ledger they'd found in the cave. In the growing dawn light, Cochetta examined the entries. His face remained impassive, but his knuckles went white where he gripped the book. This Webb, the chief said finally, he sold weapons to my warriors. Yes. Then used those weapons as justification for attacks on my people. Yes. And tomorrow, today, he plans to massacre this village to open copper mines on our land. He planned it, Daniel corrected. But he didn't count on his own men having consciences. Cochetta looked at Lieutenant Donovan. You are the officer who refused. Donovan Strewind. Yes, sir. My orders were to attack hostiles. When I arrived and saw only civilians, I wouldn't. You have honor, Cochetta said. Rare in your army. What will happen to you? Court-martial probably. Strip it of rank, maybe prison. Donovan's voice was steady despite the fear Daniel could see in his eyes. But I'd rather face that than become the kind of man who murders children. The chief studied the young lieutenant for a long moment. Then he did something unexpected. He extended his hand. Donovan took it, and they shook. Two men from opposite sides of a brutal conflict, finding common ground in the simple refusal to slaughter innocents. What do we do now? One of Donovan's soldiers asked. Webb has 60 men. When he realizes the attack failed, he'll bring the whole force. Kimamela stepped forward. We have proof of his crimes. We need to get this evidence to someone who can act on it. Someone with authority Webb can't override. Marshal Crawford, Daniel said immediately. Territorial marshal, based in Prescott. He's been trying to root out corruption in the territory for years. This would give him everything he needs. Prescott's 70 miles, Miguel pointed out. Long ride with Webb hunting us. Then we split up again, Kimamela said. Her tactical mind was already working through options. Father, you take our people deeper into the mountains, somewhere Webb can't follow easily. Donovan, you and your men go to Fort Lowell. Report what happened. Lieutenant, you and your men escort the prisoners, these mercenaries, and protect the villagers until we return with help. And us, Daniel asked, we ride to Prescott, fast and light, deliver the evidence, bring back the law. Cochetta looked at his daughter. You trust this white man, this Daniel Morgan. Kimamela met her father's eyes. He pulled me from the desert when he could have left me to die. He rode through the night to warn us. He stood between your people and murder. She paused. Yes, Father, I trust him. The chief nodded slowly. Then I trust him too. But know this, Daniel Morgan. You carry my daughter's life in your hands. Bring her back safely, or I will spend my remaining years hunting you. Fair enough, Daniel said. Dawn was breaking now, painting the eastern sky in shades of gold and pink. The night's urgency hadn't ended, but its worst horrors had been prevented. The village lived. The people lived. For now, but Webb was still out there. Still dangerous, still protected by rank and connections, and the simple fact that most people would rather believe comfortable lies than uncomfortable truths. They needed proof. They needed the law. They needed Marshal Crawford. Daniel and Kimamela took the two strongest horses from Miguel's string, fresh mounts that could cover 70 miles in a day if pushed hard. Before they left, Cochetta pulled his daughter aside. Daniel watched them speak quietly in Apache, saw the old chief touch Kimamela's face with a gentleness that belied his fierce reputation. When she returned to Daniel, her eyes were bright but determined. He told me to be careful, to come home safe. She mounted her horse, and he told me something else. What? That sometimes the best warriors aren't the ones who fight hardest. They're the ones who know when to build bridges instead of burning them. She looked at him. I think he was talking about you. They rode north as the sun climbed. 70 miles, one day if everything went perfectly, 2 if it didn't. And somewhere behind them, Webb was regrouping, planning, calculating how to salvage his conspiracy from the ashes of the failed massacre. The territory was changing. The old certainties were crumbling. But maybe, just maybe, in that change there was room for something better. Something built on truth instead of lies. On justice instead of profit. Daniel and Kimamela rode together through the growing heat of the day, unlikely allies bound by circumstance and choice. Behind them, a village that should have been destroyed still stood. Ahead, a reckoning that had been years in the making. The desert stretched endless in every direction. But for the first time in years, Daniel felt like he was riding towards something instead of away from it. Hope. That's what this was. Fragile and uncertain and possibly doomed, but hope nonetheless. And sometimes hope was enough to keep moving forward. At mile 20, they stopped briefly at a way station to water the horses and refill canteens. The owner, a grizzled man named Peterson, who asked no questions, provided dried beef and warned them that Webb's men had passed through an hour earlier. Told him I hadn't seen nobody, Peterson said, spitting tobacco juice. Figure any folks running from Silas Webb got good reason. The mention of Webb's first name jolted Daniel. You know him. Know of him. Came through here 6 months back with a mining engineer surveying land that ain't his to survey. Peterson's weathered face hardened. Asked me if I wanted to invest in a copper operation. I said no. My store burned down 3 weeks later. Insurance man said it was an accident. Funny how many accidents happen around folks who tell Webb no. They rode on pushing hard through afternoon heat that made the air shimmer. The landscape changed from desert to pine forest as they climbed into higher elevations. The temperature dropped, the air grew thinner, and the horses labored despite being strong. At mile 40, they saw dust on the horizon, riders coming fast from the south, too many to be friendly. Webb's men, Kimimela said flatly. He figured out where we're going. How many? 6, maybe 7. They were outnumbered, outarmed, and their horses were exhausted from 40 miles of hard riding. The mathematics of survival looked grim. There, Daniel pointed to a cluster of rock formations rising from the pine forest like broken teeth. Red Ridge, good defensive position. They made for the rocks, coaxing the last reserves of speed from horses that had already given everything. Behind them, the pursuit closed distance with every passing minute. They reached the ridge with maybe 5 minutes to spare. Dismounted, took positions among boulders that provided cover in overlapping fields of fire. Daniel checked his Winchester. 3 rounds left. The Colt still had 6, but pistol work at range was risky at best. Kimimela had 2 rounds in her Spencer carbine. Not enough for a prolonged fight, but maybe enough for what needed doing. The pursuers arrived in a cloud of dust and fury. 7 men, all veterans by the look of them, led by a captain Daniel recognized from Fort Socials. Harrison Blake Webb's closest confidant and most ruthless enforcer. They pulled up just outside rifle range and spread out. Professional, cautious. Morgan, Blake's voice carried across the distance. You're making a mistake. Webb just wants to talk. Funny way to talk, Daniel shouted back. Bringing 7 armed men. You have something that belongs to the captain. That ledger handed over and you can ride away. Can't do that, Blake. This evidence is going to Marshal Crawford. Blake laughed, the sound harsh and mocking. Crawford, you think Crawford can touch Webb? The captain has connections all the way to Washington. This territory needs that copper, needs the jobs and prosperity it'll bring. The Apache are already doomed. We're just speeding up the inevitable. By murdering families, Kimimela's voice rang clear. By slaughtering children in their beds. That's your prosperity. That's your progress. You're savages, Blake spat. Your people would still be living in caves if we hadn't brought civilization. You should be grateful we're offering relocation instead of extermination. The words hung in the air like poison. Daniel felt Kimimela tense beside him, felt the rage barely contained beneath her controlled exterior. But it was Daniel who spoke next, his voice cold as winter stone. You talk about civilization, Blake, but the most savage thing I've seen in this territory is white men justifying murder with ledger books and mine surveys. At least when the Apache fight, they have the courage to call it war. You dress up slaughter in legal documents and call it progress. Spare me the moral lecture, Morgan. You're a rancher. You stole land the same as everyone else. Don't pretend you're better than us. The accusation hit harder than Daniel wanted to admit, because it was partly true. He'd claimed his ranch under the Homestead Act on land that had been Apache territory for centuries. He'd told himself it was legal, legitimate, different from what Webb was doing. But was it really, or was it just a slower theft wrapped in prettier words? Maybe I'm not better, Daniel admitted, but I'm trying to be. That's got to count for something. Blake sneered. Trying doesn't change reality. Now hand over that ledger before people get hurt. The only people getting hurt today are the ones who keep trying to murder innocents, Daniel said. His Winchester came up smoothly, the stock settling against his shoulder. Last chance, Blake. Right away, this doesn't have to end bloody. Blake's response was to draw his pistol and fire. The shot went wide, but it was the signal his men had been waiting for. All 7 mercenaries opened fire simultaneously. Daniel and Kimimela returned fire from the rocks. Daniel's Winchester barked twice and 2 mercenaries went down clutching wounded limbs. Kimimela's carbine spoke once precisely and a 3rd man fell. But they were badly outnumbered and nearly out of ammunition. 1 round left in the Winchester, 2 in the Colt, nothing in the carbine. The mercenaries rushed using covering fire and movement professional tactics that would overrun the position within minutes. Then hoofbeats echoed from the north. Riders appearing over the ridge, not more mercenaries, but Marshal Thomas Crawford himself with 6 deputies. The lawman had been heading south from Prescott when Peterson's telegraph reached him. Crawford was a legend in the territory. 60 years old with snow-white hair and eyes like chips of blue ice. He'd served as a Texas Ranger before the war, had fought for the Union at Gettysburg, and had spent the last decade cleaning up corruption in territories from Nevada to New Mexico. "Drop your weapons." Crawford's voice carried authority that made even hardened men hesitate. "You're all under arrest." Blake's mercenaries looked at each other, calculating odds that had suddenly shifted against them. "The hell with this," one muttered. He threw down his rifle and raised his hands. The others followed suit. Only Blake himself seemed to consider fighting, his face twisted with rage and frustration. But when Crawford's deputies surrounded him with rifles ready, even he accepted defeat. Crawford dismounted and walked to where Daniel and Kimimela stood among the rocks. The marshal's keen eyes took in everything: their exhaustion, their wounds, the evidence of desperate fighting. "Daniel Morgan," Crawford said, "last I heard you were ranching down near Tucson." "Last you heard was probably more peaceful than the truth, Marshal." Crawford's mouth twitched in what might have been a smile. "Usually is. And you are Kimimela, daughter of Chief Cocheta." The marshal studied her for a long moment. "I've heard about you, the one who went to school in Santa Fe, who learned white law to protect your people." He paused. "Peterson's telegraph said you had evidence of a conspiracy, evidence involving Captain Silas Webb." Daniel handed over the ledger. "It's all there, Marshal. 3 years of weapons sales, manufactured raids, falsified reports, and tomorrow's planned massacre that would have killed 200 people if we hadn't stopped it." Crawford flipped through the pages, his expression growing darker with each entry. When he looked up, his face was carved granite. "This is treason, conspiracy to commit murder, theft of government property, fraud." His voice was quiet, deadly. "Where's Webb now?" "Don't know," Daniel admitted. "Last we heard, he was regrouping after the failed attack." "Then we find him, we bring him in. We make sure justice is served." Crawford looked at Blake. "And this one's going to help us." Blake spat. "I'm not telling you anything." "Then you'll hang alone while Webb escapes. Your choice." Crawford's voice carried the cold certainty of a man who'd seen every type of criminal and learned how to break them all. "Personally, I hope you stay stubborn. Makes my job easier." Blake's resolve cracked. "Webb's at Fort Lowell, planning his next move." "How many men?" "Maybe 40, mix of soldiers and hired guns." Crawford nodded slowly. "We'll need reinforcements then." He looked at Daniel and Kimimela. "You two willing to ride back with us, testify to what you've seen?" "Yes," they said in unison. The marshal smiled grimly. "Then let's finish this." They rode to Fort Lowell with Crawford's deputies and their prisoners in tow. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of crimson and gold. By the time they arrived, it was full dark. The fort sat on high ground overlooking the Santa Cruz River. Wooden palisade walls, a few permanent buildings, and enough soldiers to make a frontal assault costly. But Crawford hadn't built his reputation on frontal assaults. "We do this legal," the marshal said. "I'm a federal officer with arrest warrants for Webb and everyone involved in this conspiracy. We go in under flag of truce. We present the evidence. We give them a chance to surrender." "And if they don't," Daniel asked, "then we do it the hard way." Crawford's face was carved stone. "But we do it legal. By the book. Because if we descend to Webb's level, we're no better than he is." They approached the fort under a white flag. Crawford at the lead, Daniel and Kimimela beside him, the deputies behind. The gates opened. They rode in to find Webb waiting in the parade ground surrounded by 40 armed men. The captain looked like he'd aged 10 years in the last day. His uniform was disheveled, his face haggard, but his eyes burned with desperate calculation. "Marshal Crawford," Webb said. "This is unexpected." Crawford dismounted, movements deliberate and calm. "Captain Silas Webb, I'm placing you under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, theft of government property, or treason against the United States and crimes against the Apache people under federal treaty law." Webb laughed, but there was no humor in it. "On whose authority?" "And on the authority of the United States Marshal Service and the territorial governor." Crawford pulled documents from his jacket. "I have warrants, I have evidence, and I have witnesses who will testify to everything you've done." "Evidence?" Webb's voice cracked. "You mean that Ledger A fake, forgery? Anyone can see that. Then you won't mind if we examine your financial records, your correspondence with mining companies, your orders to the men who carried out attacks in your name." Webb's face went pale. "I'm a captain in the United States Army. You can't just, I can and I will." Crawford's voice was iron. "You've disgraced that uniform, perverted your command, orchestrated murder for profit. The Army will court-martial you if you're lucky. If you're not, you'll hang as a civilian traitor." Webb's hand moved toward his pistol. Every deputy's rifle came up in response. But it was Lieutenant Donovan who stopped the confrontation. The young officer stepped out from the crowd of soldiers, his face pale but determined. "Captain Webb, sir, as a commissioned officer of the United States Army, I formally refuse to follow any more of your orders. You've violated every code of military justice. You've shamed the uniform and betrayed everything we're supposed to protect." Other soldiers moved to stand with Donovan. 6 became 12. 12 became 20. Within moments, half of Webb's force had shifted allegiance. The captain looked around at the collapsing loyalty at the deputies with rifles ready at the evidence that would destroy him. "It's over, Silas," Crawford said quietly. "You can surrender now and maybe live long enough to stand trial. Or you can fight and die here. Your choice." Webb stood frozen for one long moment. Then slowly he unbuckled his pistol belt and let it fall to the ground. "I did what was necessary," he said, voice hollow. "The territory needs that copper. The country needs the resources. The Apache were doomed anyway. You just murdered good people for profit," Kimimela said, stepping forward. "You orchestrated wars. You lied to your own soldiers. You betrayed every principle you claimed to serve." Her voice was cold as winter stone. "You're not a patriot. You're a killer who found a legal excuse." Webb opened his mouth to respond, but Crawford interrupted. "Save it for the trial." The marshal gestured to his deputies. "Take him." They placed Webb in irons and led him away. The captain went quietly, all the fight drained out of him, leaving only a broken man who'd sacrificed honor for copper and lost everything. The trial took place 3 weeks later in Prescott. Federal courthouse packed gallery, every seat filled with people who'd come to see justice served or perverted, depending on their sympathies. Daniel testified for 2 hours, detailing everything he'd witnessed. Kimimela testified for 3, presenting evidence with the precision of someone who'd spent years studying white law to protect her people. Lieutenant Donovan testified. Miguel Santos testified. Even some of Webb's own men testified, trading their knowledge for reduced sentences. The evidence was overwhelming. The ledger, the witness statements, the pattern of manufactured crises and profit. The jury deliberated for 40 minutes. They returned with a verdict of guilty on all counts. Judge Samuel Hartwell, the federal judge presiding, looked at Webb with something approaching sadness. "Captain Webb, you were entrusted with the defense of this territory and the welfare of its people. All its people. You perverted that trust, orchestrated murder, betrayed your oath." The judge's voice was grave. "For the crime of treason and conspiracy to commit mass murder, this court sentences you to death by hanging." Webb showed no emotion, just sat there broken and empty as guards led him away. Outside the courthouse, Daniel found Kimimela standing alone, looking toward the mountains where her people lived. "It's not enough," she said quietly. "Justice for Webb doesn't undo the damage, doesn't bring back the dead, doesn't protect the copper deposits from the next greedy man who sees opportunity." "No," Daniel agreed, "but it's something. It's proof that sometimes the system works. That truth matters. that even powerful men face consequences. She looked at him. What will you do now? Crawford offered me a deputy marshal position, says the territory needs men who understand the difference between law and justice. Will you take it? I don't know. What about you? My father wants me to go to Washington, to meet with the Bureau of Indian Affairs, to use what we've proven here to secure better protections for our land. She paused. To make sure the next web faces obstacles before he starts, not just punishment after. You'd be good at that. Would I? I spent 8 years learning white law, and it still took a desperate fight to make justice happen. She shook her head. Sometimes I wonder if I should have spent those years learning to fight it instead. You did fight, Daniel said, with evidence and testimony and the courage to stand in that courtroom and demand accountability. That's a different kind of fighting, but it matters just as much. They stood together in comfortable silence. Around them, Prescott went about its business, people moving through their lives, most of them unaware that they just witnessed something significant. A week later, Daniel stood at the edge of his ranch, looking out across land he'd claimed under laws that had never asked the Apache if they agreed. Kimamela rode up on her gray mare carrying documents from the tribal council. My father wants to speak with you, she said. Chief Cochetta had set up camp 10 miles from Daniel's ranch on land that technically belonged to the government, but had been Apache territory for centuries. The old chief sat outside his lodge, looking older than when Daniel had first seen him, but no less formidable. Daniel Morgan, Cochetta said. Sit. Daniel sat. My daughter speaks well of you, says you fight for justice even when it costs you, says you stood with us when it would have been easier to look away. I did what anyone should have done, but most don't. The chief studied him. You know our land, you respect our ways, and you understand that the world is changing in ways that cannot be stopped, only guided. Yes, Cochetta pulled out a map. Not a government survey, but something older showing landmarks and territories in ways that made sense to people who'd lived on the land for generations. The government wants to shrink our territory, take land for copper mines, for ranches, for railroads. His finger traced boundaries. But there is land we can keep if we negotiate carefully, if we have someone who understands both worlds helping us. You want me to help negotiate? I want you to be a bridge. Cochetta looked at him directly. My daughter learned white law. You learned our land. Together maybe you can build something that protects both. It was an impossible task, a doomed effort. The machinery of westward expansion was too powerful, too inevitable to be stopped by negotiations and good intentions. But maybe it could be guided. Maybe it could be slowed. Maybe some land could be protected, some people saved, some future created that didn't require the complete destruction of everything that had been. I'll try, Daniel said. I can't promise success, but I'll try. That is all I ask. 6 months later, Daniel and Kimamela sat in a territorial government office in Phoenix, surrounded by maps and treaties and lawyers who represented mining companies and railroad interests. They'd been negotiating for 3 weeks. Slowly, painfully, they'd carved out protections. 1,000 acres of mountainous land that had copper but also sacred sites, water rights that couldn't be diverted without tribal consent, guarantees of access to traditional hunting grounds. It wasn't what Cochetta wanted, wasn't what the Apache deserved, but it was more than they would have gotten without someone fighting for them. The mining representative, a man named Harrison, signed the final document with visible reluctance. You've cost my company a fortune, he said to Kimamela. I've saved my people's heritage, she replied calmly. Your fortune will recover. Our sacred sites won't. Outside in the Phoenix evening, Daniel and Kimamela walked together through streets lit by gas lamps. We did something, she said. Not enough, never enough, but something. Sometimes something is all we get, Daniel agreed. The question is whether we keep trying for more. She looked at him. There's a social dance next week, music and food, governors hosting it to celebrate the treaty signing. Are you asking me to a dance? Only if you don't mind being seen with an Apache woman who will probably scandalize half the territory's society. I've been scandalizing society for months now. Might as well make it official. She smiled, genuine and warm. Then it's a date, Daniel Morgan. They walked through the growing darkness, two people from different worlds who'd found common cause in crisis, and built something that might last beyond it. The territory was changing. The old ways were dying, the new ways not yet fully formed. But in that uncertain space between past and future, there was room for bridges, room for people who refused to let hate have the final word, room for hope. Daniel thought about Matthew, about the son he'd lost to cholera, about how he'd wanted to build a world where children could grow up safe. This wasn't that world, not yet, maybe not ever. But it was a world where some children would grow up knowing that people from different backgrounds had fought for them, had stood up when it mattered, had built bridges instead of burning them. And maybe those children would do better, would build stronger bridges, would create the world their parents had only dreamed about. The desert stretched endless in every direction, patient and eternal. But for the first time in years, Daniel didn't see it as empty. He saw it as full of possibility. The end of one story, the beginning of another. And somewhere in that space between endings and beginnings, hope took root and grew.